Boom. The front door of Jason and Kayla Walker's brand new home flew off its hinges with a crash that shook the entire street. Wood splinters burst into the air. Smoke filled the hallway. Flames licked the walls. Kayla screamed. Jason, a decorated black Marine who had served 3 tours overseas, dove forward instinctively, pulling his wife to the ground as a brick shattered their living room window. More glass followed. Laughter echoed from outside. Ugly, cold, and unmistakable. They weren't strangers. No, it was their neighbors, Brent and Lisa Matthews. A white couple. Older. The same ones who smiled fake smiles during the day but whispered when Kayla walked by alone. The ones who had once left a "go back where you came from" note in their mailbox. The ones Jason warned his wife to ignore. But this wasn't just racism now. This was war. Jason's face was covered in ash. His Marine instincts kicked in. He was trained for this. But nothing could have prepared him for what they did to his home, his dream. The couple had destroyed everything inside. Slashed furniture, racist slurs spray-painted on the walls, American flags defaced, photos of his military service torn to pieces. But Jason, he didn't just survive combat. He became it. He stood slowly, a hard glint in his eye, breathing heavy. And right then he decided. They picked the wrong house. What happened next? How did he make them regret it instantly? We'll get there. But first, let me take you back to where it all began. 2 months earlier, Jason and Kayla had just moved into their new neighborhood in a quiet Virginia suburb. The house was small, but it was theirs. White fence, 2 bedrooms, and a big backyard for their future kids. It was a big deal for them. Kayla had cried on the front porch when they signed the papers. Jason had promised her it was a fresh start. He'd just left the military. 12 years. 12 long, grueling, back-breaking years serving his country. He had medals, stories, and scars. Some he wore on his skin. Others ran deeper. Kayla was a nurse. Sweet, kind, but strong. She had been through it all with him. Nights filled with worry, months apart, letters, and late-night phone calls that sometimes never came. She was the rock. And now, finally, they were going to have peace. Or so they thought. Their first week went smooth. The neighbors waved politely. Some even brought cookies. But the second week? That's when the cold stares started. Brent Matthews, the neighbor on the right, stood with crossed arms every time Jason mowed the lawn. He never said a word. Just watched. Judging. Lisa would sometimes call her dog away when Kayla approached on the sidewalk, acting like she was protecting it. At first, they chalked it up to awkward suburban energy. Not everyone knows how to talk to new neighbors. But it got worse. One morning, Kayla found their trash can tipped over, trash scattered everywhere, and a banana peel thrown through their open car window. Another time, Jason's tires were mysteriously slashed. He didn't say anything, didn't report it, just replaced them. Military life had taught him to pick his battles. But the final straw, for Kayla, came one afternoon when she came home from the store and found their garden dug up. Every flower she had planted with love, ripped from the ground and thrown across the lawn. A note was stuck to the mailbox, held by a knife. 3 words in all caps. Wrong neighborhood, boy. Jason called the police. But they said there was no proof. No cameras. No witnesses. I can't go to war with these people, Kayla said one night, shaking. I didn't sign up for this. Jason nodded. But he stayed quiet. He had a plan. And he needed them to think he wasn't going to fight back. Then came the block party. A yearly event the whole street participated in. Food, music, games. A community thing. Kayla didn't want to go. But Jason insisted. We can't let them run us out. So they went, holding hands, smiling. And that's when Lisa bumped into Kayla near the lemonade table and accidentally spilled grape soda on her white dress. Everyone turned to look. Some snickered. Some stayed silent. Jason stepped forward, jaw clenched. But Kayla stopped him. I'm fine, she said, smiling at Lisa like the lady hadn't just insulted her. But Lisa leaned in and whispered something. Jason didn't hear it. But Kayla's smile fell. She didn't tell him what Lisa said until later. And when she did, Jason didn't say a word. He just walked out the back door. He spent the next 2 weeks building a security system himself, quietly. Hidden cameras, alarms, motion detectors. He didn't want Kayla to worry, so he told her he was just tinkering. But every night, he rewatched the footage from the previous day. He started keeping notes. The comings and goings of the Matthews couple. Times they left. When they had guests. what they carried in and out of the house. He was gathering intel. Like a Marine. Like he was trained. Then, on a quiet Sunday afternoon, it happened. He and Kayla had gone out for a few hours to visit her sister. When they returned, the front yard was a mess. Broken glass glittered in the grass. Their front door, wide open. Smoke. Heat. Screams. Someone had set fire to their living room. Spray paint covered the walls in huge black letters. Go back to Africa. Jason ran inside. Kayla fell to her knees on the lawn, crying. The TV was gone. Furniture ripped open. Jason's military medals stolen. Their wedding photo was found in the kitchen sink, burned at the edges. And outside, Brent and Lisa stood across the street, smiling, holding hands, like it was just another Sunday. Jason stood still for a long time, staring at the ruins of his home. His fists tightened, his jaw locked. But then something changed in his eyes. A calm, a dangerous calm. He turned slowly, walked across the lawn, past the police tape, past the neighbors, and disappeared into the garage. Kayla didn't know what he was doing, but she could feel it. Something was coming. And the Matthews? They had no idea. Jason was about to make them regret everything. Instantly, the garage was dark except for one small overhead light. Jason stood beneath it, arms crossed, breathing slow. Controlled. On the surface, he was calm. But inside, a storm. He opened the locked chest in the corner. The same one he had carried from base to base, country to country. Inside, it held pieces of the old him. The version of Jason that didn't smile much. The one that kept his unit alive in the middle of war zones. The one that knew how to fight and how to win. He pulled out a thick binder. Inside, maps, blueprints, a layout of the neighborhood, and photos. Photos of Brent and Lisa Matthews. Some taken from across the street. Some taken through his own security system. But not just outside photos. No, Jason had done more. On the back of each photo, he had notes, dates, times, what they were wearing, what they carried, even what car they drove, and where they went on Thursdays at 2:15 p.m. Kayla didn't know this version of him. Not fully. He'd promised her peace when they bought this house. But peace was off the table now. They burned his home. They touched his wife. They laughed in his face. He stared at the most recent picture of Brent. It had been taken the week before. Brent was at the back of his own house, digging something near the fence line. Jason remembered thinking, what was he burying? He closed the binder, then pulled out a small black case. Inside, a drone. Military grade. Nothing fancy looking, just compact and fast. He had modified it himself. Tiny, silent, with a camera that could see clearly at night. Within minutes, it was in the air, buzzing silently over the rooftops. Kayla sat on the back steps, holding a blanket around her shoulders. The fire department had left hours ago. The police, too. They said they'd look into it. Same line as before. She didn't even cry anymore. Jason joined her without a word. Just sat beside her and put an arm around her. Then, he handed her a small tablet. What's this? She asked. He turned the screen on. The drone's live feed came into view. Brent and Lisa were outside, behind their house, laughing, barbecue going, drinks in hand. Like nothing had happened. They're having a party, Kayla whispered, her voice hollow. Jason nodded. But they won't be smiling for long. She looked at him. What are you going to do? Jason didn't answer. He just looked back at the screen and smiled. The next morning, it began. Lisa woke up to find her rose bushes, perfectly trimmed and award-winning, dug up and replaced with dirt that spelled out liar in big block letters. No footsteps. No evidence. Nothing on her doorbell cam. The next day, Brent came outside to get in his truck, only to find all 4 tires had been replaced with smaller ones that didn't fit. His truck sat on the ground, tilted and useless. Scratches marked the hood, deep ones, almost like claws. He called the police, but there was no footage, no prints, no suspects. Jason was precise. Every night, he used the drone. Every morning, he watched their reactions. But this was only the beginning. Jason wasn't just trying to scare them. He was setting a trap. A week later, Lisa's dog went missing. 3 hours later, it was found safe, but inside their own backyard shed, door locked from the inside. No sign of how it got in there. But taped to the wall was a photo, an old one, of Brent and Lisa at a rally. A certain kind of rally. One they never talked about publicly. The words, "we know," were written across it in red ink. That night, Brent lost it. He stood on his porch, screaming into the night. Show yourself, coward. Jason watched from behind his own curtains, silent, arms folded. Not smiling, not laughing, just waiting. Kayla was worried now. Not because she didn't want justice, but because she saw something in Jason she hadn't seen in years. The old him. The one who didn't sleep. Who planned too much. Who stayed 3 steps ahead of everyone. You're scaring me, she said one night. I'm almost done, he whispered. She didn't ask what he meant. She just nodded. 2 days later, Brent's work computer was hacked. His entire inbox, every email, every forwarded message, was sent to his boss, including the ones filled with slurs, jokes, and things that would ruin him. And it did. By noon, Brent was suspended. By 5, he was fired. Lisa? She tried to defend him online, posted long rants on the neighborhood app. But someone, Jason, leaked a video, her voice, clear as day, calling Kayla a name that silenced the entire feed. People stopped talking to them. They were frozen out. Their friends stopped visiting. Packages stopped arriving. Neighbors crossed the street to avoid them. Jason didn't gloat, didn't post, didn't brag. He just watched it all unfold, quietly, day by day. Kayla was stunned. You did all this? She asked one night, her voice low. Jason just said, they earned it. But the Matthews weren't done. Not yet. That weekend, Brent got drunk. Real drunk. At 2 a.m., he showed up at Jason's house with a baseball bat, screaming. Jason was waiting for him, standing on the porch, arms crossed. And for the first time, Brent looked scared. He swung the bat once. Jason ducked easily, grabbed Brent's wrist, twisted it until the bat clattered to the ground, then leaned in and said, do it again, and I'll make sure you never wake up in your own bed again. Brent stumbled away, sweating, shaking. Kayla stood at the door, watching, and the very next morning, the Matthews house exploded. Not literally, but what was found inside? Well, let's just say, it wasn't Jason who told the authorities. It wasn't Jason who leaked the footage. It wasn't Jason who filed the anonymous report. But someone did. And what they found in that basement shook the entire neighborhood. Brent and Lisa's house was surrounded by black SUVs by 8 a.m. No sirens. No flashing lights. Just quiet, efficient movement. Men in dark suits moved like shadows, wearing gloves and carrying small black cases. One of them held a warrant. Jason stood in his living room, sipping coffee from a chipped mug, watching through the blinds. Kayla stood beside him, arms folded. What's going on? She asked. Jason didn't look away from the window. They found it. She turned toward him slowly. Found what? He took another sip. Exactly what I needed them to. Across the street, Brent stumbled out of his front door, barefoot, face pale, hands in the air. Lisa followed, screaming. She tried to fight one of the agents off, but they cuffed her in seconds. Neighbors peeked from behind curtains. Some came out on their porches, whispering, gasping. Kayla covered her mouth. Jason, what's happening? Jason finally turned toward her. Calm. Measured. You remember the drone? She nodded. Well, it saw something it wasn't supposed to see. In the Matthews basement, under the old floorboards, behind a false wall, there were boxes. Dozens of them. Some filled with racist memorabilia, flags, posters, books with titles that didn't belong in any home. But others? Weapons. Illegal ones. Unregistered. Ammo stacked like they were preparing for a war. But that wasn't the worst part. What shocked the agents was the binder. It looked just like Jason's. Only this one didn't contain intel about Brent and Lisa's movements. No, it was filled with photographs of Jason and Kayla, taken at the grocery store, at church, at the dog park, even through their bedroom window. Times, dates, routes. It wasn't just stalking. It was a plan. Jason had suspected it from the moment his drone caught Brent digging something near the fence. He'd flown it lower that night and snapped pictures. Then, when the fire happened, he decided it was time to finish it. But he didn't go to the police. No, he leaked just enough to someone else. Someone with a bigger interest. The feds. He'd served long enough to know who to call. And now, Brent and Lisa were being hauled off in handcuffs, faces red, teeth clenched, swearing they were innocent. But the proof was undeniable. For the first time since the Walkers had moved in, the neighborhood was silent. That night, Kayla sat on the porch swing, wrapped in a blanket. She stared at the street, now empty and calm. The Matthews house was dark, police tape across the lawn. She looked up at Jason, who had just joined her. I don't even know what to say. He sat beside her, Don't say anything. Did you know it would go this far? Jason exhaled slowly. I hoped it wouldn't, but I planned for the worst. Kayla leaned her head on his shoulder. I just wanted peace, she whispered. I know, he said. I didn't want revenge. Jason didn't answer. He just stared into the dark. Then, a car pulled up. A silver sedan. Out stepped a woman, mid-50s, brown trench coat, sharp eyes. She crossed the street and came directly toward them. Jason stood. Jason Walker? Yes. She reached into her coat pocket and handed him a plain white envelope. I'm not allowed to say where this came from, she said, voice calm but firm. But someone upstairs wanted you to have this. She turned and walked away. No further explanation. Jason opened the envelope slowly. Inside, one photograph. A black and white surveillance still of Brent in a parking lot, talking to someone. But not just anyone. Someone Jason recognized. Someone who wasn't supposed to be in the picture. Jason's hands tightened around the photo. Kayla saw the change in his face. What is it? She asked. Jason didn't answer at first. Then he looked at her, and what he said next made her heart stop. This goes deeper than Brent and Lisa. Kayla blinked. Deeper how? Jason looked back down at the photo. They weren't acting alone. Suddenly, the porch light across the street flicked on. It was the elderly woman next door, Mrs. Geraldine. She was watching them, but not with concern, with fear. And then she did something strange. She shut the blinds. Fast. Like she didn't want to be seen. Jason looked back down at the photo again. Then turned to Kayla. We're not done, he said quietly. Kayla's eyes widened. You mean there's more? Jason nodded slowly. There's a lot more. And just then, bang. A loud crash came from their backyard. Jason jumped up, instincts kicking in. Kayla froze. The motion lights didn't turn on. That meant one thing. Someone had disabled them. Jason reached under the bench by the door and pulled out a crowbar. Quiet. Focused. He signaled Kayla to stay inside and walked carefully around the side of the house. Every step was slow, measured, until he turned the corner and froze. There, in the middle of the backyard, a box sat on the ground. Wrapped like a gift. No label. No tape. Just sitting there. Jason crouched beside it, checked for wires, motion sensors, anything. Nothing. Just a box. He opened it slowly. Inside, a phone. Nothing else. It lit up on its own. One message on the screen. You should have stayed quiet. Jason's heart pounded. Then the screen changed. A video began playing. And what he saw shattered everything. Jason's hands clenched the sides of the box as the video played on the phone's screen. The backyard was quiet. Too quiet. Even the bugs had stopped chirping. The glow from the phone lit up his face, his jaw tight, his eyes locked in place, blinking once, then not again for a long while. Kayla, watching from the back window, could feel something was wrong. Very wrong. She stepped outside. Jason? He didn't answer. She walked slowly toward him. Jason, what is it? He looked up at her, and for the first time since the night of the fire, there was something new in his eyes. Fear. Not for himself. For her. He turned the screen toward her. She gasped. On the screen was them, Jason and Kayla, sitting in their living room, last night. Laughing. Watching TV. Completely unaware they were being watched. Then, cut to another clip. Jason in the garage, working on the drone. Then Kayla in the shower. Then the porch. Their bedroom. Different angles. Different nights. All inside their house. Jason's face went pale. There's a second camera system. Kayla shook her head. But how? We installed everything. You checked. I checked our system, he muttered. I still on the phone. But someone else had theirs. The video ended. A new message popped up. You started this. You're not ready for how it ends. Jason's hands gripped the phone so tightly, the plastic creaked. He stood quickly, scanning the yard, the trees, the neighbors' windows. Everything fell off. Kayla stepped back, shaken. Jason, what do we do? Jason looked around the yard again. We find a camera system. Tonight. But where? He didn't answer right away. His mind was racing. Then it clicked. Geraldine. Kayla blinked. The sweet old woman next door? She's not just watching. She's recording. But why would she? Jason cut her off. Because Brent and Lisa weren't working alone. This goes deeper. And I think she's part of it. Kayla's hands trembled. What if they're still watching us right now? Jason turned off the phone, snapped the back open, pulled out the battery, and dropped the pieces back in the box. Then we give them something to watch. That night, they acted normal. Ate dinner by the TV. laughed loud. Jason even opened the blinds in the living room, on purpose, so anyone watching would see them living their regular life. But what no one saw was what was happening in the garage. Jason was building something. A decoy. He placed 2 mannequins in the living room chairs, taped heating pads to their backs so they showed up warm on infrared, set the TV on a loop of last night's video. From the street, or from a thermal scope, it would look like they were watching a movie again. But Jason and Kayla? They slipped out the back window just before midnight. Black hoodies. No lights. Silent steps. They crept around the fence to Mrs. Geraldine's yard. Jason knelt down by the side of her house. There, just below the flower boxes, was a small black dome. Tiny, hidden in the siding. A camera. Kayla's mouth dropped open. That's aimed right at our bedroom window. Jason nodded. She's watching. He moved along the house's wall and spotted another dome. Then another. Not police cameras. Not hobby ones. High-end. Military grade. Jason recognized the make. He'd used them before. She didn't buy these from a store, he whispered. What does that mean? Kayla asked. Jason's voice dropped low. It means someone gave them to her. Someone who knew what they were doing. They reached the back of the house. A small basement window was cracked open. Jason helped Kayla climb in first, then followed. Inside, it was dark, musty, and cold. They moved carefully, phones off, flashlights dimmed to the lowest setting. The basement was cluttered with old boxes, furniture, and dozens of antique dolls that seemed to watch them as they moved past. Jason froze. Kayla did too. They heard something upstairs. Footsteps. Slow. Dragging. Kayla whispered, "Is she awake?" Jason shook his head. "Doesn't matter. We need proof." He opened a filing cabinet and flipped through folders. Most were old bills, papers, retirement plans. Then, one marked Community Action. Jason opened it. His hands stilled. Inside were meeting notes, printed emails, photos of families, mostly Black or Latino. A map of the neighborhood, with red XS over certain homes. Kayla read aloud. New applicants must be reviewed and vetted before they are allowed to purchase property on this street. We cannot let them change the neighborhood. Jason flipped the next page. Brent's name, Lisa's, and Geraldine's signature at the bottom. She's the organizer, Jason said. She ran the whole thing. Kayla gasped. Then they both froze. A floorboard creaked above. Someone was coming down. Jason grabbed Kayla's hand and pulled her behind a shelf. The basement door opened slowly. A cane tapped the steps. Slowly. Tap, tap, tap. Then, asterisk. Click, asterisk. A light flickered on. Geraldine appeared at the bottom of the stairs, dressed in her nightgown, eyes sharp. But not scared. Not confused. She knew. "You've been poking around where you shouldn't be," she said, voice clear and calm. Kayla stepped out. "You were behind it all." Geraldine gave a slight smile. "I am the neighborhood." Jason stepped beside Kayla. "You watched us. You let them attack us." "I didn't let anything," Geraldine said. "I just encouraged the right people." Jason stared her down. "And now they're in jail." Geraldine's eyes glinted. "Jail is temporary. What's coming next won't be." Jason stepped forward. "Whatever this is, whatever group you're a part of, it ends tonight." Geraldine raised an eyebrow. "Is that a threat, Maureen?" Jason smiled coldly. "No, that's a promise." But then, a bang upstairs. The front door slammed. Heavy boots. Multiple footsteps. Voices. Jason grabbed Kayla. "They're not done yet," he muttered. Geraldine's smile widened. "You should have stayed quiet." Jason pulled Kayla toward the back of the basement. They had to get out, fast. But as they reached the small back window to escape, the lights went out. And in the pitch black, a voice whispered from the shadows. "You're not leaving." Darkness swallowed the basement like a thick wave. Jason froze, his instincts roaring to life. He reached out, grabbing Kayla's hand tight, pulling her behind a wooden shelving unit. They pressed their backs to the cold concrete wall, heartbeats pounding in their ears. "Jason," Kayla whispered, trembling. "I'm here," he whispered back, voice razor sharp. "Stay low. Don't move unless I tell you." Footsteps moved across the basement floor now. Heavy boots. At least 2 sets. Wood creaked above as more moved around the house. Jason narrowed his eyes, adjusting to the dark. These weren't cops. And they weren't neighbors. They moved like trained men. Controlled. Precise. Quiet. Kayla leaned into him. "You think?" Geraldine called them. He nodded. She's not just some racist old woman. She's part of something bigger. Something organized. A small click echoed across the basement. Jason tensed. They're using NVGs, night vision goggles. That's why the lights went out. They wanted the upper hand. Jason reached into his pocket and clicked a small pen light. Low red beam only he could see with his contacts. He'd had them implanted years ago during special ops. Not military standard, above it. He scanned the room. 2 figures. Both armed. Sweeping slowly. One was near the breaker box. The other? Just 10 feet away. Kayla was shaking now. She could hear the boots. The deep breathing. The slow, patient hunt. Jason had no weapons on him. But he did have one advantage. He knew this basement better than they did. He'd studied every inch of the house's blueprints after the fire. He leaned in and whispered to Kayla, lips barely moving. When I say go, crawl fast. Out that window. Don't stop. She shook her head. I'm not leaving you. You will. Or we both die. Silence. Then, the man nearest them stepped forward. Jason acted. He shoved the shelf hard, crash, sending it toppling into the man with a thunderous smash. Screams. Metal clattering. Kayla bolted toward the window. Jason launched after her, grabbing the broken shelf's leg as a makeshift weapon. The second man charged, swinging. Jason ducked, thrust the wood forward. Crack. The man dropped. Kayla reached the window, pushed it open, scrambled out into the cold night air. Jason was right behind her. But just as he slid through, bang, a shot rang out. Splinters exploded next to his arm. Another shot. Jason rolled, grabbed Kayla's hand, and sprinted toward the tree line behind the houses. The moonlight barely lit the path, but he didn't stop. Gunfire cracked behind them. Then headlights. More vehicles. They're trying to trap us, Jason shouted. Kayla stumbled, but he held her up. They ducked behind a fence, then slid through someone's backyard. Jason knew he had one chance. One. If they made it to the storm drain near the back of the neighborhood, they could lose them. They reached it breathless, sliding down the slope. Jason pulled open the rusted gate. They disappeared into the tunnel just as flashlights swept over the hill behind them. Breathing hard, soaked, covered in dirt, they crawled through the narrow drain until they reached the other side. Kayla collapsed, coughing. Jason crouched beside her, listening. No one followed. Not yet. He helped her to her feet, and they slipped into the shadows between 2 storage buildings downtown. They were safe, for now. Kayla looked up at him, shaking. Who the hell are these people, Jason? He leaned back against the wall, jaw clenched. I don't know, but they've got structure, discipline, equipment, contacts. Kayla blinked. This isn't just racism anymore. Jason looked down at her, face hard. No, this is organized hate. Something deeper. Something that's been watching us. Kayla's voice cracked. What do we do now? Jason pulled out a small black phone. Not the one from the box. One he'd kept hidden since the military. Only used once before. He dialed a number. It rang once. Then a voice answered. Deep. Calm. Been a long time, Sergeant. I need a favor, Jason said. You only call when things are about to get ugly. Jason looked out at the empty street ahead. They already did. The voice replied. Where are you? Newport Avenue. Near the South Lots. Stay there. You'll see headlights in 4 minutes. The line went dead. Kayla stared at him. Who was that? Jason stared back, eyes cold. Someone who owes me his life. For minutes later, a black SUV pulled up. Jason opened the back door and ushered Kayla in. A man stepped out from the driver's seat. Early 50s. Crew cut. Military posture. Damn, Walker. You look like hell. Jason smirked. You should see the other guy. Kayla looked between them. Who is this? The man offered his hand. Name's Tucker. Ex-Intel. I owe your husband for pulling me out of a burning convoy in Kandahar. She blinked. You're military? Used to be. Now, I work in shadows. They drove in silence for a while. Then Tucker spoke again. I know what this is. Jason turned to him. Then tell me. Tucker nodded. They're not random racists. It's a network. Quiet. Hidden. Started years ago after military cuts and political shifts. They recruited former soldiers. Trained ones. Angry ones. They embed in neighborhoods. Schools. Government. They call themselves the Restoration Order. Kayla gasped. That sounds like a cult. It's worse, Tucker said. It's an underground militia. Brent and Lisa? They were pawns. Geraldine? She's a handler. One of many. Jason leaned forward. What do they want? Tucker looked back through the mirror, eyes dark. They want America back. The SUV stopped at a hidden location, an old warehouse safe house on the edge of the city. Tucker unlocked a steel door, leading them inside. Inside, monitors, maps, files, screens full of faces and names. He pointed to a board in the corner. It had Jason and Kayla's pictures. Red lines connected them to others. One picture, blurred, had a question mark below it. Tucker pointed. That's their leader. Nobody knows who he is. But rumor is, he's former top brass. Real ghost type. Never seen. But everything runs through him. Jason stepped closer. Kayla gripped his hand. We have to expose them, she said. Jason nodded. And we will. But just then, an alarm blared on Tucker's system. He ran to a screen. A new alert. One of the restoration's encrypted communication channels just lit up. 3 words on the screen. Take the girl. Jason's blood ran cold. Tucker spun around. They're going after Kayla. Not you. Jason turned to Kayla. Her face was frozen in shock. No. Suddenly, asterisk. Boom, asterisk. The side wall exploded inward. Smoke. Fire. Glass. Men in black gear stormed in. Jason tackled Kayla to the ground. Tucker drew his weapon, firing. But there were too many. A flashbang rolled across the floor. Blinding white. Kayla screamed. Jason reached for her hand. Asterisk. Too late. She was gone, dragged into the smoke. The last thing he saw was her eyes, wide, terrified, reaching for him as masked men pulled her into the dark. Jason lay on the ground, ears ringing. The warehouse burned. Kayla was gone. And Jason? He had nothing left to lose. Flames danced against the warehouse walls, casting long, violent shadows as Jason pushed himself up from the rubble. His head rang, his vision blurred. Smoke filled his lungs, but he didn't care. Kayla was gone, snatched from his arms. Tucker lay unconscious nearby, blood dripping from a gash above his eyebrow. Jason crawled to him, shaking him hard. Come on, wake up. Tucker groaned, coughing through the smoke. They took her. Jason stood, fists clenched so tight they bled. I know. He stumbled to the console, what was left of it. Sparks flew from exposed wires. Most of the screens were shattered. One, barely clinging to life, blinked with a single red dot moving across a map. Jason tapped into it. The signal was faint, but familiar. It was her. He had secretly installed a GPS chip in Kayla's necklace 2 years ago, after a mission overseas reminded him how quickly life could vanish. She never knew. He'd never needed it. Until now. The red dot moved slowly north, toward the mountains. A remote area with no cell towers, no neighborhoods. Jason stared at the screen. Okay, he growled. You want war. He turned to Tucker, who was trying to sit up. You got gear stashed anywhere? Tucker coughed again, then nodded toward the far wall. Under the floorboards. Go. Jason pried up the old wooden planks and pulled out a military-grade duffel bag. Inside, a SIG Sauer P226, a collapsible rifle, 2 flashbangs, body armor, and a combat knife. He strapped up without hesitation. Tucker groaned. You can't go alone. I won't be, Jason said. He pulled out his phone and tapped into a contact marked Dead Drop Alpha. It rang twice. Then, you alive? Jason replied. They took my wife. Silence. Then, say no more. We ride at dawn. Jason killed the call. He turned to Tucker, who was now sitting up, holding a bloodied towel to his head. I'm getting her back. You know what you're walking into, right? Tucker asked. The restoration doesn't arrest people. They erase them. Jason loaded a magazine into his sidearm and chambered around. Then they'll have to try erasing me first. Kayla's head throbbed. Her wrists were bound. Her mouth gagged. She was lying on a cold concrete floor. The smell of mildew and metal filled the air. Faint light flickered overhead, a broken fluorescent tube humming somewhere above her. Her eyes adjusted to the dimness. The room was big, an old bunker maybe. Stone walls, a steel door, cameras in every corner. A man stood near the wall, arms crossed. Tall, thick beard, military stance. He didn't speak, just watched her. She tried to scream through the gag, tried to move. Nothing. The door behind him opened. In walked Geraldine, still wearing her nightgown, but now with black boots and a bulletproof vest. Her eyes locked onto Kayla's with a cold smile. Hello, dear. Kayla's eyes widened in shock. You didn't think I'd just sit back, did you? After everything you two have done? The files you stole, the exposure? Geraldine crouched beside her. You and your husband stirred up a hornet's nest. Now we have to clean up the mess. Kayla struggled, grunting behind the gag. Oh, hush, Geraldine said softly, patting her cheek. You're not going to die, not yet. You're too important. She stood. See, the restoration order needs an example. Someone to send a message. And you, sweet girl, just became that message. She turned to the soldier near the door. Tell the commander we're ready. The man nodded and stepped out. Kayla's heart pounded so loud, she couldn't hear anything else. She didn't know who the commander was, but she had a sinking feeling. He was the shadow behind everything. And he was coming. Jason arrived at the edge of the woods just before sunrise. 2 trucks followed behind him, old friends, old soldiers. Marcus, Hawk, Delaney, Sniper, Recon. Eli Turner, Explosives and Tech. They didn't ask questions, just loaded up and followed. Hawk pulled his rifle from the case. Where's the signal now? Jason checked the tracker. Here, about 3 miles through this terrain. Old military outpost. Probably decommissioned. Eli whistled. That's enemy territory now. If they've taken it over. Jason cut him off. Then we take it back. They moved fast, staying low, flanking from the east. Jason's mind was laser-focused. He wasn't thinking about the odds. He was thinking about Kayla. Her laugh. Her strength. The way she never gave up on him during deployments. The way she cried on their wedding day. The way she kissed him goodbye that morning like nothing bad could ever happen. He wasn't going to let them take that from him. Not her. Not now. Through his scope, Hawk spotted movement. Guards. For at the entrance. Light armor. AKs. Jason nodded. Take them down. Silently. Hawk's rifle hissed once, twice, 3 times. By the 4th, all 4 men dropped like puppets with their strings cut. Jason moved in, signaling Eli to plant charges near the north wall as a distraction. They breached from the back, slipping in through an old ventilation shaft. Inside, the bunker was silent. Too silent. Then they heard it. A voice over an intercom. Raspy. Calm. I see you, Marine. You made it farther than we thought. Jason froze. It wasn't Geraldine. This was someone else. Someone higher. The commander. You were supposed to be one of us, you know? After you left the Corps. But you married wrong. Thought wrong. Now you've chosen the losing side. Jason's voice echoed through the hall. You picked the wrong wife. Silence. Then, you'll never see her again. Jason moved faster. Room to room. Clearing halls. Breaking locks. Until finally, he reached the steel door. The tracker pinged. Kayla was inside. He kicked it once. Twice. Bang. The hinges buckled. Hawk and Eli covered his back. He burst through. Kayla was on the floor, hands tied. Geraldine spun around in shock. Jason didn't hesitate. Crack. 1 punch. She dropped like a sack of flour. Jason ripped the gag from Kayla's mouth and held her face. Baby, you okay? She nodded, crying. You found me. He cut the ties. Pulled her close. Gunfire erupted outside the room. Eli shouted, They're coming in hot. Jason helped Kayla to her feet. Can you run? I can fly, she whispered. He grinned. They bolted down the hall, joining Hawk and Eli in a hail of bullets. Kayla didn't stop. She moved like fire. They fought through smoke and gunpowder. They made it to the trucks just as the charges blew. Boom. The bunker collapsed behind them in a fireball. They didn't stop driving until the sun had fully risen. Kayla clung to Jason the whole way. And when they reached a safe house miles away, she finally exhaled. Jason looked into her eyes. It's not over, he said. This goes all the way to the top. Kayla nodded. Then let's burn it down. The morning after the rescue, sunlight spilled across the safe house floor, but the warmth didn't touch Jason's heart. Kayla sat beside him on the couch, bandages on her wrists, hair still damp from the shower. She leaned into him silently. Neither of them had slept. Hawk and Eli stood near the window, watching the tree line like hawks, no pun intended. The TV played quietly in the background. Breaking news. Former suburban couple, Brent and Lisa Matthews, released from federal custody due to insufficient evidence. No charges filed. Jason's jaw tightened. Kayla's voice cracked. They're letting them go? Jason nodded, fists curling. Told you. This goes deeper. Someone's protecting them. Tucker stepped out of a side room, wiping grease off his hands. I checked the trucks. They tagged you. Jason turned. What do you mean? Kayla's tracker? Wasn't secure. That video they sent you? It came from a remote relay connected to your own system. They used your tech against you. Jason exhaled through his nose. Rage simmered beneath the surface. They're always a step ahead. Tucker nodded. Because they're getting inside help. Federal. Military. High level. Kayla sat up. We need to go public. Jason turned slowly. What? She stared at him, eyes red but focused. Expose everything. Names. Files. The network. We tell the world. Tucker shook his head. Too risky. They'll smear you before the news even hits. And if you mess up even a little, you're both gone. Forever. Jason looked down. He had evidence. Videos from the drone, pictures from Geraldine's basement, emails from the hacked servers. But not enough. Not to take down the entire restoration order. He needed their head. The commander. The ghost. The man no one had seen. Until now. Eli pulled a USB drive from his jacket and tossed it onto the table. Jason grabbed it. What is it? Eli grinned. Insurance. He plugged it into the TV. Grainy footage played. A surveillance video. A group of men in a large warehouse. At the center, one man in a long coat, face blurred by shadows. But then, he stepped into the light. Jason leaned forward. It wasn't just anyone. Kayla gasped. Oh my God. Jason stood slowly, fury rising in his chest. It's him. The man on the screen was a decorated former Lieutenant General, Douglas R. McCrae. A man Jason had once met during a ceremony overseas. A man he had once shaken hands with. McCrae was a legend in the military, retired, respected, powerful. And now, the confirmed leader of the Restoration Order. Jason whispered. No wonder Brent and Lisa walked. He's pulling the strings. Hawk narrowed his eyes. You ever wonder why someone like that would lead a hate group? Tucker spoke low. It was never about hate. Not just that. It's about control. These guys think the country is slipping away. So they want to take it back, by force. With people like them in charge. Kayla stood, her voice trembling. We have to take him down. Jason nodded slowly. And we will. That night, the team went dark. No phones. No signals. Only encrypted comms. Tucker made contact with a hidden ally, someone inside the Defense Department. A woman named Maya Reese. She'd been trying to expose McCrae for years. But every time she got close, someone above her shut it down. She agreed to meet. But only in person. Neutral location. A remote diner 3 states over. 1-hour window. Jason and Kayla went alone. When they arrived, Maya was already seated in a booth near the back. She was young, sharp-eyed, with the kind of posture that said, don't try me. Jason slid in across from her. Reese? She nodded. You Walker? Yeah. I saw the footage. Kayla leaned in. Can you help us? Maya glanced around. I can do more than that. I can give you access. Jason raised an eyebrow. To what? She slid a folder across the table. Inside, blueprints, security codes, names of agents. McCrae's holding a private retreat in 2 days. Outside Phoenix. Desert compound. No press. No outsiders. Just him and the top-tier order members. Kayla's heart raced. And you want us to go? Maya leaned forward. I want you to end it. Get inside. Get the proof. In the network. Jason looked at the blueprints again. Tight security. Private guards. One way in. No way out unless you flew. He nodded slowly. We'll go. Maya stood. Don't get caught. If you do, I won't know you. 2 nights later, Jason, Kayla, Hawk, Eli, and Tucker were geared up and flying low across the desert in a stolen military chopper. Kayla was scared, but she wasn't backing down. Not now. She wasn't just Jason's wife. She was a fighter. And this time, she was coming for war. The compound was surrounded by desert cliffs, high fences, and watchtowers. Inside, floodlights swept the yard. Armed guards in black gear marched in rotation. But Jason had studied every inch. He found their blind spot. They touched down half a mile out, hiked in through a dry ravine. As they reached the edge of the compound, Hawk signaled. Window. 13 seconds. Jason gave the order. Go. They moved fast, slipping through a side gate just as the lights rotated. Inside, they used suppressed weapons and muscle memory, knocking out guards, avoiding cameras. Then, Jason saw him. McCrae, standing in front of a small stage, addressing a group of men in suits and fatigues. Jason pressed the mic. Recording live feed. Let's go public. The signal went up through a satellite node Eli planted. Straight to Maya. She hit send. And within seconds, it was everywhere. McCrae's voice echoed through phones, laptops, TVs across America. We will take our country back, brick by brick, block by block, and we will erase anyone who doesn't belong. Jason watched him, live streaming his own downfall. He stepped forward into the room, rifle raised. Every head turned. Gasps. Confusion. McCrae's eyes narrowed. Walker, you remember me? Jason said coldly. You were always too loyal to see the bigger picture. Jason stepped forward, Kayla beside him. I see it now, and the whole world's seeing it too. McCrae's face dropped as screams echoed outside. Guards were running. Sirens in the distance. The building shook. Feds had arrived. McCrae lunged for a gun. Jason fired once. Crack. The commander dropped. Silence. Then, cheers from outside. The bunker opened. FBI teams swarmed in. Kayla collapsed into Jason's arms, crying. It's over. Jason held her tight. No, he whispered. It's just beginning. News spread like wildfire. McCrae, exposed. The restoration order, shut down. Members arrested. Leaders indicted. Brent and Lisa? Rearrested. Geraldine? She vanished. Vanished, but not forgotten. Jason and Kayla returned home weeks later. The neighborhood was quiet. But something had changed. Neighbors who once watched from behind curtains now came out front. Apologized. Welcomed them. The Walkers weren't just residents anymore. They were legends. Kayla planted new flowers that spring. Jason rebuilt the porch swing. And every morning, they sat together, hand in hand, stronger than ever. But deep down, Jason kept the drone charged. Because some shadows don't die easy. The sun was setting behind the quiet suburban street, painting the sky with streaks of orange and purple. A soft breeze rustled the trees, the hum of life slowly returning to normal. On the outside, everything looked peaceful, but Jason Walker knew better. He sat on the porch with Kayla, the porch swing gently creaking beneath them. Her head rested on his shoulder. The scent of her vanilla shampoo mixed with the cool evening air. For the first time in weeks, there was calm. But Jason couldn't relax. Not completely. His fingers tapped against the wood of the swing, rhythmically. Not nervous. Just waiting. Kayla noticed. You're still on edge. Jason glanced at the street. Because it's not over. They caught McCrae. We exposed the order. He nodded slowly. We broke the front of it. But snakes like that don't die in one cut. Kayla sighed. So we're just supposed to live in fear? Forever? Jason looked at her. No, he said. We live ready. Inside the house, their new security system ran silent. Facial recognition. Tripwire detection. Underground camera feed. Tucker helped him rebuild it all. Smarter. Invisible. Untraceable. But there was something else Jason hadn't told Kayla. Not yet. That night, when she went to bed, he stayed up in the garage. Pulled out a package delivered 2 days prior. No return address. Just a black envelope inside. Inside that, a single photo. Old. Faded. A young McCrae, smiling. With Geraldine. And another man. Jason stared at it. The third man wore military fatigues, but the name tag had been scratched out. On the back of the photo, 3 words were written in red ink. The circle remains. Jason swallowed hard. Geraldine hadn't just vanished. She'd regrouped. He scanned the photo into his laptop, ran facial recognition on the third man. The result hit hard. Name, Colonel Byron West. Status, deceased. Cause of death, training accident, 2009. Jason frowned. Except he knew that name. Colonel West had trained Jason personally when he entered recon school. The man was a legend, but had died in a freak accident over a decade ago. Jason opened a folder on his desktop labeled Red Phoenix, a classified project he had once been assigned during his second deployment. It had been sealed, buried, locked behind levels of clearance. But Jason knew how to bypass. And what he found there chilled his blood. Colonel Byron West had not died. He had been reassigned to a domestic operation labeled Purity Protocol, a program built under the radar, designed to safeguard American values through strategic infiltration of urban development and cultural institutions. It was the Restoration Order, before it even had a name. McCrae wasn't the architect. He was just a mouthpiece. The real mastermind, the one who created it all, was still out there, alive. And if the name on the redacted file was true, Byron West had become something else. Jason grabbed his phone, called Tucker. It's not over, he said. Tucker groaned. Tell me you're not dragging me into another storm. Jason sent him the photo. You in? Tucker cursed under his breath. Damn it, Jason. Where do we start? Jason paused, then said, We start with the cemetery. The next morning, Jason and Tucker stood at a dusty old cemetery on the outskirts of a small Virginia town. The headstone read, Call, Byron West. 1958 to 2009. Faithful. Fearless. Fallen in service. Jason crouched, brushing dust off the base. Then he noticed it. The ground wasn't settled. It looked off. Tucker nodded toward it. Looks like a decoy plot. Jason reached into his bag, pulled out a small probe. He stabbed it into the soil. Hollow. He turned to Tucker. Get me a shovel. An hour later, sweat rolling down their necks, they hit something hard. Metal. Jason dropped to his knees and brushed it off. A small black box. Locked tight. No body. No casket. Just the box. Jason opened it. Inside, a drive. And a sealed note. He opened the note. You found me. I always knew you would. But I left the trail for a reason. Because we're not finished. The restoration order was Phase 2. Phase 3 begins soon. Jason stared at the final line. And this time, she's the target. Jason's stomach dropped. He looked up at Tucker. They're still coming for Kayla. Tucker paled. What the hell is Phase 3? Jason plugged the drive into his secure laptop. A video loaded. Colonel Byron West appeared. Alive. Older. Same sharp eyes. His voice echoed from the speakers. They thought McCrae was in charge. Let them. But true restoration requires sacrifice. We needed the fire to burn, so something greater could rise. We are the circle. We are eternal. And when she falls, he will too. Jason slammed the laptop shut. Tucker looked at him. What does it mean? Jason stood, fists shaking. It means they're not done. They're coming again. That night, Jason returned home. Kayla was in the backyard, watering the plants. She looked up when he arrived. You okay? She asked. Jason walked over and wrapped his arms around her, holding her close. Tighter than usual. Kayla leaned back, confused. Hey, what is it? Jason looked into her eyes. They're coming back. Her face fell. What? Who? The man behind all of it. The real one. He's alive. He's planning something bigger. Her voice broke. What does he want? Jason swallowed. You. She stepped back, stunned. Me? Why? I'm not. You're the symbol, Kayla. You're what we fought for. You're what they hate. You survived. You stood up. You lived. And that makes you dangerous. She was silent. Then she stood tall. I'm not going anywhere. Jason smiled, proud. No, you're not. Just then, a knock at the door. Jason's muscles tensed. He walked slowly to the front, hand on his sidearm. He opened it. Standing there was a young girl, no more than 13. Shaking, clutching a small, white envelope. Jason knelt down. Who sent you? She trembled. A man with silver hair. He told me to give you this and run. She shoved the envelope into his hands and bolted down the street. Jason opened it. Inside, a photo of Kayla at the grocery store, taken just 2 hours ago, and a card that simply read, Your move, Marine. Jason closed the door, heart pounding. Then turned to Kayla. They're already watching again. She didn't flinch. Then let them watch. Jason nodded. Because this time, we'll be ready. The following morning, the storm clouds weren't just in the sky. They were inside the Walker home. Jason stood in the kitchen, hunched over a table cluttered with printed satellite images, decrypted files, and a blinking red dot on a live map feed. He hadn't slept. Again, his jaw was tight, his hands steady, his mind locked in full mission mode. Across from him, Kayla leaned on the counter, staring at her untouched coffee. She was quiet, strong, but there was a new tension in her shoulders, one she couldn't shake. She finally broke the silence. Why would they send a child to deliver that photo? Jason didn't look up. Because they want us off balance. They want to remind us they're everywhere. He pointed to the red dot on the map. They followed you yesterday. That's their first step. Next, they'll move to exposure. They want the public to turn on you. On us. Kayla crossed her arms. Then let's go public first. Beat them to it. Jason looked at her. They're not just going after our lives, Kayla. They're going after our reputation. Our story. If they can paint us as radicals, vigilantes, traitors, they don't have to kill us. They just erase us without a bullet. She nodded slowly, her voice tight. So what do we do? Jason pulled out a file marked Phase 3. It was what he had decoded from the drive buried at Colonel West's fake grave. Inside, he found a layout. A plan. Phase 1, political infiltration. Phase 2, social destabilization through public attacks. Phase 3, cultural cleansing. A full-blown campaign targeting families, educators, creators, anyone with influence who challenged their vision of traditional America. At the top of the list, Kayla Walker, registered nurse/community organizer/survivor. Kayla's photo, circled in red. Jason clenched his teeth. This isn't about me anymore. Kayla took the file, scanned the list of names below hers. Teachers, journalists, even a pastor. They're trying to control the narrative. Remove the voices they can't manipulate, she said. Jason nodded. Exactly. We have to get ahead of it. And I think I know how. He pulled up an old contact on his phone. Nina Brooks, an investigative journalist with a spine made of steel and a reputation for exposing high-level corruption. She answered after 2 rings. Jason Walker. Last time we spoke, I was hiding in a supply closet in Guatemala while you pulled me out of a cartel mess. Jason smirked. You still owe me a favor. She chuckled. Knew you'd come collecting one day. What's the story? He hesitated, then said, a war. One no one sees. One that's about to go public. He sent her the full packet. The files, the audio from Colonel West, the live footage from McCrae's compound. Everything. There was silence on the other end. Then, I'll get this out. But if this is real, they'll come for me too. Jason nodded. Then stay mobile. Nina's voice turned serious. And you? You ready for the spotlight? Jason glanced at Kayla, standing tall in the doorway. He replied, we were born for it. 2 days later, the story broke. A massive expose on the Circle, the hidden infrastructure behind the Restoration Order. Nina's story ran under the headline, Shadows in Uniform. How a secret network is targeting America from within. Screens across the country lit up with Jason and Kayla's names. Some praised them. Others attacked them. Tucker called first. They're scrambling. Half their base just went dark. The other half is burning files. Eli messaged. They've put a bounty on Kayla, $150,000. Anonymous source. Hawk texted a single word. Move. Jason turned to Kayla, jaw locked. We have to disappear. Now. Kayla didn't argue. They packed the essentials in under 10 minutes. But as they stepped outside, boom, their front car exploded into a fireball. The blast threw them backward into the porch railing. Jason groaned, pulling himself up. Kayla was dazed but okay. Smoke curled into the sky. Jason looked up the street. A man stood at the end of the block. Black coat, silver hair, watching, not moving. Jason's blood ran cold. West. The man raised his hand, just a wave, then turned and walked away. Jason helped Kayla to her feet. Inside. Now. That night, they hid at a rural safe house. No lights. Phones off. Jason watched the trees through night vision binoculars. Every movement made his heart jump. Kayla sat beside him. That man, Byron West, Jason said. He's not dead. He faked it. He planned all of this. Kayla was shaking now. Not from fear. From fury. All of this, because they're scared of change. Jason looked at her. No, because they're scared of you. Of what you represent. A black woman, standing tall, fighting back, refusing to be silent. That's their nightmare. She took his hand, her voice firm. Then let's make it worse for them. Jason smiled. The next morning, they received a secure message from Nina. The video had gone viral. 20 million views. But so had something else. The Restoration Order's own footage, from one of their internal meetings, had been leaked. And in it, Colonel Byron West stood on stage, speaking directly to his followers. His voice was clear. We will erase the symbols of their defiance. One by one, starting with Kayla Walker. She will burn. And when she does, the rest will kneel. Jason stared at the screen. I'm ending this. Kayla turned to him. I'm going with you. Jason looked her in the eyes. This wasn't just his war anymore. This was hers too. Together, they turned to the map. West was holding one final rally. One final show of power. And they were going to walk in, face him, and end it. A thunderstorm rolled in over Georgia the night of the rally. Thick black clouds and sky-shaking booms that echoed like war drums. It was fitting, because what was about to happen wasn't just a confrontation. It was the beginning of the end. Jason and Kayla stood on the edge of a wooded ridge, cloaked in dark rain gear, staring down at a compound that had once been a National Guard training facility. Now, It was crawling with heavily armed men. Floodlights pierced the sky, and at the center of it all, a large stage had been built. Loudspeakers. A giant American flag distorted into the Order's twisted version of patriotism. Jason adjusted his rifle strap. Kayla zipped up her jacket. "You sure about this?" he asked. Kayla turned to him, her eyes calm, steady, fierce. "I've never been more sure of anything." Below, men in tactical gear were filing in, private militias, off-the-grid ex-soldiers, and young recruits too blind to know they were pawns. Jason could see at least 40 of them, probably more inside the facility. "Any sign of West?" Kayla asked, peering through binoculars. Jason shook his head. "Not yet, but he'll show. This is his victory lap. He thinks he's already won." Behind them, Tucker, Hawk, and Eli crouched low, watching through scopes and drones. Eli whispered, "We've tapped their communications. They've got full security scans, roving patrols every 6 minutes, facial recognition running on all gates." Tucker added, "And there's chatter. They know Kayla's coming." Jason looked at Kayla. "They're not just expecting you. They want you. This is a trap." She nodded. "Then let's spring it." Jason blinked. "You're not going in alone." "I know." She reached into her bag and pulled out a small, disguised USB. "Let me get on that stage. Let me speak. I'll plug this into their broadcast system. Live stream it to the same channels Nina used. Show the country everything." Jason hesitated. "It's too dangerous." She stepped closer, took his hand. "I survived being kidnapped. I survived a house fire. I survived the weight of their hate. I'm done hiding, Jason. If we run from this, they win." Jason stared at her, then nodded. Together, they went over the plan one last time. Kayla would go in, dressed as one of the volunteer loyalists, using stolen credentials from the Order's comms network. Tucker would provide cover from the North Ridge. Hawk and Eli would scramble their internal comms and shut down the surveillance. Jason? He'd be watching her every step, a silent shadow in the crowd. If anyone moved wrong, he'd end it. An hour later, inside the compound, Kayla stood near the edge of the stage dressed in khakis and a black raincoat. Her cap was pulled low. No one looked twice, just another face in the crowd. Jason watched from a rooftop above. He counted every guard, every weapon, every breath. Then the crowd hushed. The loudspeakers crackled, and Byron West stepped onto the stage. Older, grayer, still towering, still dangerous. He raised his arms. "Brothers and sisters, tonight, we rise again." Cheers erupted. "Our enemies have tried to shame us, silence us, even destroy us. But we're still here, stronger than ever." He paused. His eyes scanned the crowd, then landed on Kayla. He smiled. "Kayla Walker." Gasps. Movement. Guns raised. Shouts. Jason tensed. But Kayla stepped forward, unshaken. "I'm here," she said. Jason's finger curled near the trigger. West raised his hand. The crowd stopped. "I admire your courage," he said. "Truly. You came willingly, to the heart of what you fear." Kayla's voice was steady. "I'm not afraid of you." West tilted his head. "You should be." Kayla pulled the USB from her jacket pocket and plugged it into the sound system's console. The screens behind West flickered, then changed. Live footage appeared. McCrae's confession, West's training videos, files of weapons smuggling, lists of targets. The crowd began to murmur. West turned. His face dropped. Kayla stepped onto the stage. "People of this country," she said, her voice booming through the mic. "I was never meant to survive. They wanted me erased, silenced. But I'm still here." The crowd didn't cheer. They watched, silent. Still, I was targeted because of my skin, because I loved someone they hate, because I dared to live freely. But the truth is, you were lied to. All of you. Some in the crowd shifted. Guards glanced at each other. Jason moved closer on the roof, covering her. "Ready?" Kayla continued. "They told you your country was stolen. They fed you fear. But real freedom? It doesn't come from control or purity. It comes from unity, from truth." West's face twisted. "Enough." He lunged forward. Jason fired. Crack. The bullet struck the stage beside West's foot. Not a kill shot. A message. "Step again." Jason growled into the comm. "And the next one goes between your eyes." Guards froze. Kayla turned to West. "You lose." Just then, sirens wailed. Lights exploded across the compound. Helicopters overhead. FBI. SWAT. Even the National Guard. They descended like a tidal wave. West tried to run. Jason jumped down from the rooftop, sprinted across the yard, weaving through stunned guards and scattering recruits. He caught up to West at the edge of the fence line, tackled him hard into the dirt, gun to his throat. "This is for her." West sneered. "You think this ends with me?" Jason's eyes narrowed. "No, it ends with the truth." Feds swarmed them. Jason stood, letting them take West. The fallout was massive. Dozens arrested. Facilities raided. Financiers exposed. A second wave of indictments swept through the country like wildfire. The circle was broken, not shattered, but wounded. The air shifted, and something deeper began to heal. Kayla's speech hit headlines around the world. She was invited to speak at the Capitol, at colleges, on national television. Jason stayed beside her, quiet, steady, proud. Not because she needed protecting anymore, but because he had witnessed her become something unstoppable, something the world had to see, a symbol of survival, but also of victory. Weeks later, they returned to their rebuilt home. The neighborhood had changed. People waved, welcomed them, listened. Kayla stood in the front yard, planting a tree. Jason walked up behind her, holding 2 cups of coffee. She turned, smiling. "Think it'll grow this time?" Jason looked at the sapling. "I think it'll be stronger than ever." They sat together on the porch, fingers intertwined. Silent, peaceful, but watchful, because some shadows might still remain. But together, they were ready for anything. The peace didn't last long. Exactly 42 days after Byron West was taken into federal custody, news broke that shook the country once again. Breaking: Byron West escapes custody in federal transport ambush. Officials investigating inside help. Jason dropped the wrench he was using to fix the gate. The sound echoed in the silence that followed. Kayla stepped out onto the porch, holding her phone. Her face was pale. "He's gone," she whispered. Jason stared into the street. "No, he was released." Kayla's hands trembled. "How? After everything?" "The trial hasn't even started yet." Jason didn't speak. He knew. This was phase 4. They'd been warned. The circle remains. The words came back to him like a whisper inside his skull. Not a warning. A promise. Jason called Tucker. No answer. Called Eli. Nothing. Then Hawk. Hawk picked up. Voice low, breathless. "Bro, we've got a problem." Jason already knew. Hawk continued. "Tucker's gone. Eli's house was hit. Surveillance shows 6 men in black, military trained. They moved like ghosts. It's happening again." Jason's voice turned hard. "They're cleaning up. Taking out anyone who helped expose them." Kayla stepped forward. "So what do we do?" Jason looked at her, eyes like stone. "We go to the one place they think we won't." That night, Jason and Kayla arrived at an abandoned building downtown, formerly a government records hub, now condemned and mostly forgotten. Jason had used it years ago as a drop point during operations. Tonight, it was something else. Inside, Nina Brooks stood with a laptop, surrounded by makeshift servers and backup drives. Her hair was tied back, and she hadn't slept in 2 days. "They're wiping everything," she said, eyes scanning code flying across the screen. "Every file we leaked, every audio file, every video, they're pulling it offline faster than we can back it up." Jason leaned over her shoulder. "Then we leak something they can't delete." Kayla frowned. "Like what?" Jason pulled out a hard drive. Inside, a raw, uncut, and encrypted audio file. Taken years ago, Jason had recorded it during a classified debrief, where McCrae, West, and 2 other unnamed men had laid out an early plan for what would become the Restoration Order. Jason had been a green soldier, invited by accident, told to sit in the back and keep his mouth shut. He did, but he wore a wire, something he'd never turned in. Until now. Nina plugged it in, eyes wide as the voices played. "We don't need to convince the world. We just need to guide it. Slowly, quietly. Control the message, and we control the country. And what about the ones who fight back? We make them disappear. Quietly, of course. If you silence the voice, the crowd forgets it ever existed." Kayla's breath caught in her chest. That's West." Jason nodded. "And that second voice? That's a sitting U.S. Senator." Nina cursed under her breath. "We leak this, everything burns." Jason looked her in the eye. "Then burn it." She uploaded the file to 3 separate international news organizations and sent it to a global whistleblower network. Within minutes, the story exploded. "Exclusive. Audio leak ties sitting senator to extremist plot. Evidence of deep state operation goes public. Outrage grows. And with it came more. Brent and Lisa Matthews were rearrested again. This time, no bail. Geraldine? Still missing. But Kayla had a hunch. She pulled out the still uncracked notebook found in Geraldine's basement. The one Jason had thought was just filled with grocery lists and block schedules. But Kayla had been working on it in secret, reading between the lines. She cracked the cipher. It was a logbook. Every member, every meeting, every address. And on the very last page, one phrase was circled over and over. The day of correction, December 12th. Jason checked his watch. Today was December 10th. 2 days. 2 days before whatever was coming was unleashed. Kayla stood, clutching the book. We have to stop this. Jason nodded. We will. Nina pulled up the final page of the file dump. A live ping. A gathering of devices in the mountains of Idaho. Hundreds of them. Satellite view showed a compound. Massive. Heavily fortified. Jason narrowed his eyes. It's not just another rally. Kayla agreed. It's a launch point. Whatever they're planning, it starts there. Nina looked between them. Then we hit them first. Jason looked at Kayla. She stared back, calm. This time, she said, we finish it. That night, they prepared. Hawk flew in with stolen satellite uplinks and 2 untraceable drones. Nina brought a field team of freelance journalists, ready to record everything. Kayla suited up, not just in gear, but in resolve. She wasn't the same woman who'd cried on the lawn the night of the fire. She wasn't even the same woman who'd faced West on the stage. She was something more now. Something dangerous to people like him. She was a symbol they couldn't kill. Jason approached her as she checked her sidearm. You sure? She smirked. You keep asking that. And I keep showing you I'm not going anywhere. He grinned. Just had to hear it again. He pulled something from his pocket. A small box. Kayla opened it. Inside was her wedding ring. Burned. Bent. Recovered from the rubble of their first home. I had it fixed, Jason said. Thought you might want to wear it, you know. In case things go sideways. She slipped it on. It never came off, baby. Not even once. They kissed. Quick, fierce, and full of fire. Then Jason looked at the map. All right. We've got 2 days. 2 days, Kayla repeated. Until they try to erase us. Jason strapped on his gear. Then let's make sure they remember our names forever. December 12th. The mountains of Idaho were buried in snow, but the cold wasn't the most dangerous thing out here. Jason crouched on a cliffside overlooking the Order's hidden compound. 5 square miles of steel, concrete, and armed guards. The entire site buzzed with movement. Trucks rolled in and out. Drones zipped across the sky. Floodlights cut through the falling snow like spears. Kayla was beside him, her breath forming clouds in the icy air. Her eyes scanned the valley, unblinking. Down below, a sea of people had gathered. Hundreds, maybe more. Loyalists, soldiers, believers, all ready for what Byron West called the day of correction. The plan? Simultaneous attacks on government data hubs, community centers, and communication networks. A wave of cyber strikes and orchestrated violence meant to tip the country into chaos. To purge it, they weren't just trying to send a message anymore. They were trying to take control. But tonight, that plan dies. Jason spoke quietly into his calm. Tucker, you in position? North Gate, copy. Hawk. East Tower scoped and ready. Eli, jamming begins on your mark. Jason turned to Kayla. Last chance to back out. She gave him a look. Stop asking. He smiled. Had to try. They rappelled down the ridge under cover of darkness, slipping through the trees. Nina and her camera crew were already in place on the opposite side, ready to stream the takedown live. The world was watching. But Byron West didn't know it yet. Jason and Kayla made it to the inner fence. Beyond it, the central structure loomed, an old decommissioned missile silo, repurposed into the Order's main command center. Guards were posted at every entry point. Kayla whispered, we need a distraction. Jason nodded, clicked his comm twice. 2 seconds later, boom. An explosion rocked the north side of the compound. Tucker's doing. Chaos broke loose. Alarms blared. Guards scrambled. Jason and Kayla used the moment to scale the fence and sprint for the command center. Inside, it was colder, quieter, tense. They moved fast, silent through the steel corridors, until they reached the control room. And there he was, Byron West. Older now, but more dangerous than ever. His silver hair slicked back, his black coat crisp, his eyes burning with hatred as he turned to face them. Well, he said calm. The girl and the soldier. I always knew it would come down to this. Kayla stepped forward, eyes locked on him. Your war ends tonight. West smiled. You really think ending me will change anything? I've already won. The message is out. The correction is happening. You can't stop it. Jason raised his weapon. We'll see. But West didn't flinch. Instead, he pressed a button on the desk beside him. A massive screen lit up. Maps, countdowns, a list of targets. Jason's eyes locked on the timer. 1 minute, 17 seconds. Kayla gasped. He already launched it. West smirked. You're too late. Jason didn't hesitate. He shot the console. Crack, crack, crack. Sparks flew. Wires exploded. But the countdown didn't stop. Backup servers, Kayla said, racing to the keyboard. Give me cover. Jason stepped between her and West as she started typing, eyes darting across the screen. We can override it, she said. But I need time. West lunged at Jason. They clashed hard. The old man was strong, trained, but Jason was stronger, smarter. He dodged, countered, and drove his fist into West's ribs. West coughed, then pulled a knife. Jason blocked it with his forearm, gritting his teeth. Kayla shouted, 30 seconds. Jason knocked the blade away and slammed West into the wall. Call it off, he growled. West spat blood and sneered. Never. Jason raised his fist, then froze. Kayla was shouting, I need a password. Jason turned to West. What is it? West laughed. You won't get it. Kayla shouted. Jason. 10 seconds. Jason stepped back, took a deep breath, then looked West dead in the eyes, and said softly, Valor 6. Kayla froze. Typed it in. The countdown stopped at 0:04. Silence. Then the screens all shut down. The lights flickered. Power died. The threat was gone. Kayla collapsed back in the chair, shaking. Jason looked down at West. The old man's eyes were wide. You knew the fail-safe code, he rasped. Jason stared at him. You trained me. Did you really think I didn't listen? West tried to speak, but the words never came. Feds burst and seconds later, guns raised. Jason and Kayla stepped back. It's over, Jason said. West didn't argue, because he knew it was true. The footage of the final takedown streamed across every major network. Kayla Walker's speech, the takedown of Byron West, the shutting down of the day of correction. All of it went public. The circle fractured. Some fled. Most were arrested. The nation watched and listened. For the first time, people asked the right questions. For the first time, people saw who the real enemy was. Weeks later, Kayla stood in front of a packed auditorium at Howard University. She wore a simple black dress and a gold pendant around her neck. Jason watched from the side, hand resting on the back of his neck, pride written across his face. Kayla took a breath, then spoke. I was once told I didn't belong here, that my life didn't matter, that my story would be erased. She paused, her voice stronger now. They tried to silence me with fear, with violence, with hate. But I'm still here, not just because I survived, but because I refused to stay quiet. The room erupted in applause. Jason's eyes welled, not with sadness, but with something deeper, something earned. Peace. After the ceremony, Kayla stepped down from the stage. Jason met her halfway. She threw her arms around him, and they held each other in the center of it all. He whispered in her ear, You did it. She smiled. No, we did. And for the first time since the fire, since the threats, since the war began, they both knew. It was truly over. The hate didn't win. The love did. The truth did. And as they walked hand in hand into the light of the future, the world watched and remembered.